Hey gang, and we're boogieing down in this edition of Film Craic. We're at the roller-rink, and it's Skatetown, USA. If you thought Chinatown was good, wait till you get to Skatetown.
Skatetown.
Right, I think we should probably stop doing that. We might give motion sickness.
Yes, to our poor viewers. Wow, Clive. This movie. Well, I mean, right. Okay, first of all, to call this a movie is a stretch of the term movie.
Yeah, see, this is exactly that fool Ron Scott's argument when I made him watch Orgy of the Dead.
Okay.
Philistines.
But here's the thing. Have you seen this? I know you're not a big fan of Star Wars or any of its related ancillary nonsense, but have you ever seen the Star Wars Christmas special?
I know of it. It's notoriously terrible. I know. I can't remember if I've ever actually sat down and watched it. I mean, like I said, it's not high on my list, right? But
yes, yeah. So what Skatetown USA is a glorified TV variety show.
Yes.
Masquerading as a movie.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that.
And I'm trying to remember if I've ever seen anything quite like this, that was like something that was seen in theaters, in movie theaters, that was clearly just a TV variety show kind of thing with endless cutaways to dance scenes and like just where the narrative is threaded through. Like I was watching and I was like, okay, we're 8 minutes in and I don't know who the main character is yet or what the conflict is. And then slowly these things emerge out of the ether of the neon soaked ether that is Skatetown USA. But like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's more quality from the director of Blackenstein.
Yes.
Wham Bam, Thank You, Spaceman. And Hellgate, which is another one I remember enjoying. William A. Levy and co-written with Nick Castle.
Yes, the actor who played Michael Myers in Halloween, and then obviously went on to a directing career.
Yeah, The Last Starfighter. Right?
Yes, Last Starfighter. Yeah, and there's a ton of other. Oh yes, and Richard Dreyfuss's brother, who was the other screenwriter. Lauren Dreyfus.
Oh, is that right? That I didn't know. Okay, interesting.
So yeah, there's some real quality folks, and then of course in the cast we have incredible folks like the guy who played Horshack on Welcome Back, Kotter.
Right.
Who plays a Afroed BG looking thug. Second to
Is that Ron Palillo?
Yes.
Right. Also, editor on this film was Gene Fowler Jr., who directed I Was a Teenage Werewolf and I Married a Monster from Outer Space.
Okay.
So there's a lot of talent squandered. So we should say, first of all, so this is a bit of a fudge for the format, but
technically.
Yeah, but I forced Nick to watch it, so I kind of felt bad for him to have watched it for no reason. So, did you end up watching it twice, by the way?
Oh, 1.5 times. I'd watched the first half of it in that grainy, muddy mess of a print that you sent me originally, and then came back and was like, I might as well just from the beginning in this much more pristine.
Yeah, so I was led to, because when I first saw this film, Skatetown USA was very much missing in action, right? Like it had never got a VHS release, a DVD release, a Laserdisc, a VCD. I don't think it ever played on, or it might have played once on television or something, and that's where someone grabbed it. Right. So there was a bootleg version around and like in shitty quality, but yeah, it wasn't available in any format. So, and in a way that made the experience of watching it kind of more interesting in a way, because you're watching this kind of long lost, because it is very much a time capsule.
Oh yes. Yes.
But then there was a Blu-ray, but one of those boutique Blu-rays that quickly sold out, right? So now you're kind of back to square one and you can't see it again.
Yeah, no, as I said, it really was non-extant almost for like 40 years. Basically from the time it came out, was released in cinemas, and I think quite quickly died in cinemas, was pulled, and then they didn't, there was no VHS, there was no Japanese laser disc, there was no DVD until what, a year or 2 years ago.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't the hit, even though it managed to beat it into theaters, it wasn't the hit that Roller Boogie was.
Which is, exactly.
Which I suppose is the Citizen Kane of this kind of
roller disco movies,
thing, right? But thing is, when I first watched this, and alcohol was involved.
Okay, that would definitely.
I kind of had. I mean, I know it's shit, but I kind of had a good time with it for a variety of it's more like a cinematic autopsy or something like. Let's see what went wrong with this patient. Like,
well, no, it's I mean, I guess we should maybe say, our stars are Scott Baio, who, if people remember him, he would be remembered as Chachi from Joni Loves Chachi, and Charles from Charles in Charge. Yeah. And so he himself says, and in a career that has plenty of garbage in it, that this was by far and away the worst piece of shit he ever appeared in. And he and his excuse is just that they kept coming back and offering him more and more money, and finally he was just like, fine, but then showed up and realized that there is no script. Everyone is high on cocaine all the time. Apparently the movie was just awash in mountains of coke, which definitely makes sense.
It does strike one as a very coke-addled film, doesn't it? It's filled with people doing comedy routines that only they would think was funny if they had, if they were coked to the
gills.
So it's basically set at this roller rink, which has this DJ in a white afro wig who
I assumed must be
laser beams. No,
yes, to make people kind of appear onto the floor of the disco. But I thought he must be somebody famous, because so many of the, but he's not. Yeah, but so many of the other people in this are stock variety TV American or stock sitcom American kind of actors.
Right.
With the exception of the introducing Patrick Swayze, who appears to be in an entirely different movie where he's really trying hard.
Yeah, well, to be fair, he's quite. I mean, I didn't know that. I suppose I should have known because he's most famous for Dirty Dancing, for example. I didn't realize that he came from a dance background.
Oh yeah, classical ballet.
Certainly didn't know that he was a roller skater.
No,
which he is, right? He can roller skate clearly.
Yeah. No, he's pretty damn good, and in the acting terms, he's the only person who's trying, really.
He plays Ace, right? Whose routine involves this strange sequence where he whips with his belt, right?
The whole dominator kind of thing. Yeah.
What I noticed he's really good at doing in this film is he's really good at reacting to things. When something happens and he takes umbrage at it, he's really good at conveying that, isn't he? He does a lot of what now? He does a lot of that.
Yes.
He's quite good at it.
No, he is. You can see notes of his later performances in Roadhouse and Dirty Dancing for sure, right here. So Scott Baio plays this manager of this Flash Gordon looking,
Isn't he though? Greg Bradford. He's kind of like Flash Gordon after a lobotomy.
Yes.
I don't mean to be mean to the fellow, but he just looks. He looks like a fucking subhuman.
Yes,
There's
yes.
nothing
Like,
going on behind the eyes. He
like,
might be a really smart guy, I don't know, but Jesus
no,
Christ,
you're
he doesn't
right.
look it.
Well, his mouth is open a lot. Like my wife would watch some of it, but she was kind of like, can he close his mouth? And he's got those slightly frog eyes. They're kind of slightly too far apart.
Mouth
But yeah,
breather.
he's kind of, yeah, he is kind of like the inbred farmhand version of Flash Gordon.
Yeah, Cletus Gordon.
Gordon, yeah, exactly. And then we've got so there's they kind of they're these partners. They've come, you know, to try to win the moped. I guess that's those are the stakes, right? They can win a moped if they win the skate competition.
It's Greg Bradford with his sister, which is Maureen McCormick, who was formerly Marsha Brady.
Brady, yes.
And fuck me, she's hot in this film.
Yeah. And apparently she fell way off the wagon. Apparently she'd already had a previous coke habit, cleaned up, and then lost a few years to Skatetown USA.
Those Brady bunch, they weren't quite as clean cut as they looked, were they?
On TV, no.
No, she's smoking in the film. I think it helps that she's wearing those roller skating shorts as well. Obviously, there are a lot in this film. So if you're of a certain vintage like me and Nick, that's kind
of. You may remember over on that that podcast thing where we talked about leg warmers and
leg warmers. This is very much that.
Yes. I have a very soft spot, or
a hard
sort of spot. For all of the fashion of that kind of right around then. It's funny, a few years either side, less so, but right there, the sweet spot, 79, 80, 81. But then, so we've got Patrick Swayze in his first film role, if we can call this thing a film, as our villain, I guess. The leader of this pack of, like, I love how they're kind of just like skating down, pushing people over, and just being jerky skaters, you know.
West Side Wheelers.
Yes, and they've got these kind of like leather vests and purple t-shirts.
It's very beast, isn't it?
They also kind of look like they've skated out of like the Warriors, like they're just another gang. You know what I mean? Like
Warriors, skating.
Exactly. And then we've got Flip Wilson, who is like, you know, quite a well-known stand-up comedian of the era, kind of who I realized sort of did that whole Martin Lawrence Big Mama's House, you know, Eddie Murphy. Who's the guy who's famous for all of the Medea stuff? Like, he just does endless. Tyler Perry, you know, the same kind of, like, again, you're in Japan, you're not necessarily as aware of these things. No. But yes, this is, but you know, this, apparently Flip Wilson was doing that stuff back in the 70s. This kind of.
He's one of those figures as well, I think, who is, it's interesting. I come across this every now and again. So I'm predominantly a film guy more than I am a TV guy, but obviously we did have, you know, garbage American TV on British when I was a kid as well, but we didn't get all of it. So there's certain kind of personalities who are mega famous in the States for one particular specific thing, and I don't know these people at all unless they're in films. And Flip Wilson, I knew Flip Wilson from this, and I knew he was someone because, you know, clearly he's someone because that's why he's in the film, and he's the guy who runs the roller rink and also plays his own wife in drag, which is just
his own mom in drag.
Is it his mother? Is it?
Yes, because he is Billy Barty's son.
Anyway, that whole thing is just, you know, when something's just not, it's not even laughably unfair. It's just pathetic and cringeworthy. And speaking of which, again, this is someone who probably is someone, but Bill Kirchenbauer, who I think might have been in the of Robin Williams, right?
Yes.
So he plays this apparently hilarious, like not real Nam vet, like a pretend Nam vet.
Yes.
every scene with him in is just
Torture.
excruciatingly unfunny.
Yeah,
Like, really horrible.
That stuff is yeah, and I guess he did later on go on to be on various sitcoms and stuff.
Yeah, I think he was on Mork and Mindy a few times and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So so Flip Wilson, I didn't really know who Flip Wilson is, but yeah, he had his own show called Flip, right, for years and years and years, and seemed to be a guest variety show type.
And
thing.
it seems like the his mom character that he's playing is a thing that he was famous for, doing this kind of,
right,
you know.
Yeah, so yeah, very episodic. Obviously, one thing that happens is that drugs end up in the pizza mix, in the cheese.
Yes. Which was a lot less clear in the muddy print. So I'm glad I actually watched from the beginning. I didn't really catch it as clearly in this kind of the messy print. And then when I saw it, I was like, oh, okay, I see. And so the guy who plays the drunk, right?
Murray Langston, right?
Yes, yeah. Yes. He's in the movie twice. I guess you probably already know.
He's the unknown comic, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Canadian.
Another Canadian. I was going to say another thing to be proud of, the unknown comic. To be fair, though, I've always considered the unknown comic kind of a little bit funny. There's something about his
performing with a paper bag on your head
kind of routine, which is kind of funny. Like, he does a joke in this, which is so unfunny, it's funny. When he comes out and goes, here's an impression of the first guy who lands on the sun. Ow, it's hot. That's rubbish. That's hilarious. He kind of straddles that line a little bit, doesn't he?
Yes, yes.
I remember he was in, because he turns up in oddly enough, a few Billy Barty films. I think he's in Night Patrol.
Okay.
And because there's a few movies with Billy Barty and Linda Blair as well. I get a feeling if she wasn't in Roller Boogie, she would have been in this.
Yes, right. Yeah. I do like Billy Barty. In fact, he's one of the better things about the movie, and he seems to be genuinely enjoying himself.
He always does that. Billy Barty always brings like a dignity to everything. He's like, don't worry, pal. He rises above it, doesn't he? He's got a real old school professionalism about it.
Right? Yeah. No, he's great. He's one of the things I enjoyed most. And Jen was saying that she was surprised that given the general lowbrow tenor of the whole thing, that there was only really one joke about his height, and it was kind of not really played for laughs either.
No. Flip Wilson has a few racial kind of gags as well. When the unknown comic says, here's a joke that'll curl your hair, and he goes like, it's too late.
Yeah. And then he shows up with a paper bag on his head that he's painted black at the end, which is like, okay.
I tell you who's one of my favorites in this as well, and I don't know why I quite get such a kick out of this guy. Dorothy Stratton is in this film, the ill-fated model who ended up getting murdered not too long after. It was in Galaxina as well, and
and she was who's she, like, I mean, I know her ex-husband who was estranged and obviously an asshole, killed her, but she was it Bogdanovich that she was dating? Like, she was with and he was apparently.
And they made the film. I haven't seen it. I'm keen to see. There's that movie Star 80, right, which is all about Stratton, and it's a Bob Fosse film. And I really like all that jazz, for example. So I was going to try and see it in time for this actually, but I didn't have time. So Dorothy Stratton is trying to order pizza, and she gets chatted up by this guy, this like really old-fashioned baggy pants comedian, right?
Leonard Barr, I think his name is.
Leonard Barr, who is the uncle of Dean Martin.
I know that blew my mind when I read that.
He's also in Diamonds Are Forever, the Bond film.
Yeah, and I guess he was a burlesque house. Like, he goes right back to like turn of the century, Like,
he's been telling the same jokes for about 50 years, right?
Yes, but with no timing. Just like he spits them out rapid fire. You don't even know when one joke's ended and the next one's beginning.
I couldn't even understand what he was saying half the time. I'm wondering if his shtick was like kind of like the Unknown comic was he famous for like not being funny? Because you'd think after doing this for 50 years or something, he just has no sense of delivery at all in this film.
Maybe that's how they did it back in the day. Maybe that's what. Yeah.
But I liked him, and he does actually eventually. He does make off with Dorothy Stratton, right, arm in arm
At the very end of the movie.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah. What else can we say about? Oh, there's a character. I suppose he's supposed to be like a fake Mexican guy called Pistol Pete.
Oh yes.
I was wondering if he was a relation to Texas Pete from Super Ted.
Entirely possible. And then there's also. Okay, so one of the things that's interesting about this movie, and maybe a reason why it wasn't released on VHS or DVD, is the soundtrack.
Right.
Right. Because it's a movie that bombed in the cinemas, and and then to release on VHS, the amount of, because there's a ton of surprisingly big name acts in the soundtrack, right?
Macho
but also,
Man.
Dave Mason, like the guy from Traffic, actually shows up, and then it begged all these questions of like, well, hang on, like he's clearly playing himself, right? And he's playing his music live, but is in this really depressing, like what was it supposed to be like? People be like, oh man, like Dave Mason's really doing great. He's playing at the roller disco.
I this might be totally unfair. I have to admit, I'm not overly familiar with Traffic, and he might have made great records at some point, but I fucking hate Dave Mason in this film. The 2 songs he plays,
I know.
Oh man,
they suck.
Horrible. Just, I mean, because GQ perform live as well. That's all right. I don't mind that. I also like on the soundtrack. You've got one of my favorites. I don't care what anyone says. Boogie Nights by Heatwave.
Yes,
I like that song. Yeah. It's a good song.
That's a great song. Cheap Tricks. I Want You to Want Me shows up, which is a song I'm always happy to hear.
But Dave Mason can fuck right off.
But and then there's 2 covers of Rolling Stones songs by a band I had to look up, because I was like, who the hell is this disco? Like, at one point I thought it was the Rolling Stones. I was like, did they release a shitty disco album in the late 70s?
Right.
Like,
could be.
But it's a band called Hounds, who evidently had their own music, but then.
So that's not a vocal sample. That's someone imitating Mick Jagger.
Apparently. Apparently.
Interesting. See, there's so much to learn from Skatetown.
Yeah, so much to unpack from Skatetown USA.
Also, I liked one thing I noticed as well, which has amused me, that did you notice that the toilets, they're not male and female?
Yes.
Curves and muscles.
Muscles. Yes. Yeah. Jen noticed that for sure. And then there's the nebbish husband with his with his wife. They're supposed to be on their honeymoon, and they end up, and that stuff is all off, because that's like that. What's great is like the movie just never gets any kind of momentum, because it's constantly interrupting itself. It's like it's some kind of Tourette syndrome, or like it's like a movie that has, well, I guess it's high on cocaine. So I guess that is So the movie, the celluloid itself is high on cocaine.
It's so high on cocaine, they make a joke about cocaine getting into the pizza mix. Right? Like,
yes.
I suppose that's how they. What if we make everyone in the film high, and that's like, we'll cover it. That's our get out of free card.
And what's funny is that because I'm so cued for certain things, when it happened early movie, I was like, oh, this is going to take a dark turn. Like, there's going to be some lesson in this about, I was like, no.
Nice to see Sidney Lassick. I always enjoy seeing him. He turns up in it as well.
I know, yeah. He's from like, I mean, it's funny. I was trying to think what I know him most from, and it's not like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or things like that. There's something else I know him so well from.
I just know him from turning up in lots of little films like this in little bits and just being very memorable, right? Like
always playing the twitchy kind of weird.
He turned up in an episode as well of. Do you remember that very short-lived series that David Lynch and Mark Frost did called On the Air, which was like about the early days of live television in New York? He turns up in that. That's a very interesting series.
He might play a lead in one episode of the X-Files, possibly, that I saw
Could be.
at a point where he really just made a strong impression on me. But yes, and then Ruth Buzzy plays his wife, possibly. She's another one of these variety TV.
Joey Ross as well turns up as the Rent-A-Cop character. Here's a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Was the Uncle Sam skater who came out and was really shit and everyone booed, and then Flip Wilson made a Gerald Ford reference?
Yeah.
Is this what passes for satire in Skatetown USA? I was wondering, was that was it a specific satire about what was going on in 79? Was there a fuel crisis or something? Or I was wondering what this was a specific reference to, because it's the year of my birth as well.
Right. Well, Gerald Ford was famous for falling over.
Okay. Is that right?
Like, oh yeah. He had multiple spills, like walking up like plane steps, walking down plane steps. Like, he was famous for falling on his face.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it was a recurring bit that Chevy Chase used to. That I don't maybe, but Chevy Chase used to do bits on the very early, like the first season of Saturday Night Live, where he would play Gerald Ford clumsily falling into Christmas trees and out of windows and stuff. So it was the public persona.
If they had shown SNL, which was still one of those weirdest, one of the strangest things. Not that I'm a particularly huge fan or anything, although it did have good runs. It amazes me why SNL was never shown on UK TV. Because
I'm not sure why either.
The shoe-in, right? Like, it's one of the most beloved and watched American shows. You almost guarantee, like nowadays, I think it is, but back in the day, never shown.
And I can remember you and I talking about this before, and then talking about this with my Irish, cousins who stayed in Ireland, who didn't move, when things like the Wayne's World movies would come out, or any of the Adam Sandler things, and there was this ready-made audience and this ready-made context for who, if not who the actual characters are, then at least the persona that, which had been worked out in sketches over usually a couple of years before they would then, but then they would just land. I would imagine with a thud, and people were like, why is this funny? Not that it was necessarily funny on SNL either. They
lived and died on whether they were good as films, I suppose, as opposed to I think Wayne's World got it lucky, so for whatever reason people liked Wayne's World, so I think that was a hit in the UK as it. Yeah, but other things, just like flew over our heads. I didn't know where people were.
But anyway, this movie, wow. And so it ultimately comes down to a skate off between
a motorized skate
between Cletus Gordon and Dirty Dancing, Patrick Swayze.
Yeah.
And so the weirdest part of the movie is, and so then his mean gang, they're doing all of these tricks. So they flash lights in the eyes of the Uncle Sam guy, and then they put a bunch of itching powder, because again, this is the level of humor we're working with. Itching powder in the whatever he is, the Mexican looking, although he makes no real attempt to actually do a proper Mexican accent. That guy just sounds like he's straight out of Southern California. And then but regardless,
one of Ace's gang lucks out by getting the job of taking Maureen McCormick off in his car, and you're thinking, he got the best job, right? Like,
and as I said, the funny thing is that's Horshack from Welcome Back, Kotter. So he was famous for having played this like a TV nerd. So I guess this was his attempt to play against type, right? Because normally he was bow tie wearing, beaky.
Again, Welcome Back, Kotter, never, not part of my childhood.
Well, it's even before my time, really, because I mean,
but you would have had reruns and
or so again. Funny enough, sometimes like you have famously, I know it mostly because what's his face, Vinnie Barbarino, that he was the main character on the show, and Travolta. John Travolta played
Oh,
the
right,
main
right.
character on
Yes,
Welcome Back,
yes.
Kotter. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so there was a sketch on Saturday Night Live where John Travolta played him, but as directed by, it was like Welcome Back, Kotter, as directed by Quentin Tarantino, right around the time Pulp Fiction had come out.
Right.
And so, yes, okay, no, never mind. That I just made a connection to an entirely different show that we were filming just recently, so it makes no sense in this context.
Okay.
Anyway, so we'll ignore that mental leap there. But yeah, so they you know, I guess Cletus Gordon ends up basically taking the trophy home for best doubles, right? And he skates with, it's Swayze's sister, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they kind of do a sister exchange, I guess, overall. Basically,
yes.
This movie has this weird thing where
troubling.
the two gangs exchange sisters. But then, but yeah, like the final scene of the movie, they go outside onto the pier and they use rocket-powered skates.
Yes.
That is just so like, sure. I mean, why not at this point?
The only thing I couldn't figure out about that is, like, I couldn't quite figure out what the end game of the race is, because they just go as fast as possible to the end and then stop. Is that what they were supposed to do?
I guess
they end up flying off the railing. It's not a very exciting race. It's just a straight line.
Yeah. And again, but like what you have to love is like Swayze, like in that scene again, he's just totally like, like just completely to this and he's to this totally ridiculous scene, like of him on rocket powered skates.
I've never really, you know, I don't mind Patrick Swayze, but I've never really, but I'm, you know, quite impressed with his.
Strangely, I have more respect for him after Skatetown USA than before it, rather than the opposite.
Right.
But yeah, wow, this thing was terrible in all kinds of fascinating ways.
But it is fascinating. Yeah, no, I'm glad you got that out of it, at least, because that was my kind of a deep kind of, oddly enough, a nostalgia for actually a period you know, that I didn't actually live through. But I think you have the same thing as me, growing up in rural Ireland and growing up in rural Wales. There's a slight kind of time lag, right?
Yes.
So I feel very nostalgic for things like a few years before I was born, because I feel like that's when we got them, like that's when the impact kind of hit. So I feel very much a child of the 70s sometimes, even though I grew up through the 80s. The 70s speaks to me somehow.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm a little bit older than you, so I was born in 75, but you know, the jumpers that people were wearing in Wicklow in 1982 or 83 were definitely from 1978. And again, they were often hand-me-downs anyway. They were like your older cousins. So, you know, you had all of that kind of...
Yeah, and if you had older siblings as well, you know, they kind of told you about the things they thought were cool or whatever, and you kind of adopted them as your own, right? Plus, as well, I mean, you know, if you had the option, would you choose Peter Davison as your Doctor Who instead of Tom Baker? I think not, unless there's something very wrong with you, or you fucking love cricket or something.
Yes, yeah. Or a big fan of All Creatures Great and Small.
I've forgotten you was on that as well. Anyway, we may be straying here a little.
Yes, yeah.
So
I can't in good conscience recommend this to anybody of any age for any reason, but maybe you should all see Skatetown USA.
Yeah,
maybe everyone should see it.
It's difficult to judge, isn't it? I mean, certainly if you've ever taken a fancy to Maureen McCormick, you certainly want to.
Really, there's a lot of attractive women in this movie, and actually, in fairness, quite a few attractive men. I mean, when during the skating scenes, I remember Jen was like the bun hugging.
Oh yeah.
Like sprayed on pants that some of those guys are wearing are shocking.
If you could put a bag over his head, Cletus Gordon, I mean, he's in good.
Oh yeah, he's rock hard abs. Yeah, for sure. You know what? Again, we probably can't, but again, that frog DNA, you know, maybe that pool exists in many places around the world that you can accidentally drink from the wrong
Right.
swamp.
Right. Yes. Yes. And of course, someone out there, there's someone out there. Leonard Barr is their favorite comedian as well. So you need to see Skatetown U.S.A, because you probably already have, and you've howled with laughter over whatever I don't even remember one of his jokes. What the fuck were his jokes about? I don't even know. I just remember Dorothy Stratton going, "Can I get my pizza now?" Over and over again.
Yes. Oh, and then there was also, again, like you can always tell a movie that it's going to be, the comedy is going to be hit a very high bar when almost the first visual joke is fatty fall down. When like the big guy falls off the the snack bar onto his face. You're like, oh, okay, that's where, and then gets up with a big sausage hanging out of his mouth. And you're like, all right, yep.
Yes.
Yep.
It might be a bit too highbrow for Cletus Gordon, but for the rest of us, So there, I'm off now actually to maybe revisit. I'm in the mood to revisit the delights of Blackenstein.
Okay.
Which you've seen Blackenstein, right?
A long time ago.
Right. Again, I think fairly easy to find now, so we probably won't be doing it on Film Craic, sadly. But,
right.
Yeah. Anyway, right. I guess, yeah.